You're listening to Data Center Therapy. Please take a number, and an engineer will be right with you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Data Center Therapy, a podcast from vSphere Consulting that talks all things IT with a healthy dose of empathy. I'm your host, Matt Yeti, and alongside me is my co-host, Matt Cozzolino.
If I keep telling you this UDP joke, are you finally going to get it?
Each episode, we dive into the wide range of technologies that make up this beautiful sandbox called IT that we all play in. We share our hopes and dreams, opinions both positive and critical alike, all with a touch of empathy, because at the end of the day, we all need a seat on that couch. So today we're going to follow up on the topics that we touched on in our last episode. And if you haven't listened yet, shame on you. It was about enterprise networking in an SMB. And now we're going to chat about some of the things that an admin might need to touch in the day-to-day course of business. So we've got a lot of things that kind of we can follow up on, Matt. And I guess give me an idea of where you want this to go.
Yes, we do. So I was thinking, we had Jeremy on last time, and Jeremy is a super awesome network admin, super great network guy. And I think I kind of span the gap. I'm mostly systems, so I've got a lot of that. How do I do systems level stuff and kind of what that should look like? So let's talk about networking on vSphere and kind of what that needs from the network team.
Yeah, and can I give a little context to your journey through all of that?
Yeah.
Basically, I remember when I started vSphere now nearly 7 years ago, and that was, near 8 or 9 years since you started.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You've been here a couple of years longer than I. You were what we would call a systems engineer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where vSphere has pretty much always had a dedicated networking team and a dedicated systems team, and yes, those those bubbles cross over a little bit,
right?
But overall, we have a team dedicated for that. And I believe I remember at one point vSphere said, "Hey, we're going to grow the networking team.
We could go outside." Bodies. Yeah.
Right, but is anybody here willing to not throw away, but obviously halt working on the system side stuff and completely, fully transform over into a network engineer? Will assist you with any kind of classes or training or education you might need." And Mr. Cozzolino raised his hand.
I raised my hand. So for me, some benefit for that, or some background for that, was I did, years ago, I did some Microsoft classes, kind of back, I did Running Start. So Microsoft and Cisco were the two classes I did. And looking back on it, I'm really glad I got that really early exposure to basically the CCNA course and the CCNA curriculum. Because as I progressed in my career, I realized that, wow, being able to actually cross that boundary between systems and network made a huge difference. Being able to say, hey, this is specifically what I need to connect up my server here makes a huge difference. So
to that point, Matt, and I really appreciate that about you specifically, in that in my career, I've been, in my opinion, fortunate enough, and this is not this is my personal preference. This is not knocking anybody who works for a big company, but I've always loved working for small to medium companies, only because I'm not a silo kind of guy, and I understand there are people who are way smarter than me, and some of that is they're way smarter than anyone in one particular thing.
Yeah.
So they could be
one
a data
little
scientist that understands this or wrote this algorithm that can do this, but they can't install a printer driver.
But I can't change my tire. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that exists, and that's not a knock. It's just how people's brains work, right? So I think from an vSphere standpoint, I think a well-rounded knowledge base serves us well, serves our customers well.
Totally.
And so to your point, no matter what, you can be playing with ESXi, vSphere all day, you're going to brush up against the networking. And if you don't have to say, wait a minute, let me bring my network team in who's got zero context of what I'm trying to do here, but he's my networking. If you can avoid that and really step into 80% of what anything you might need to, it's just such a huge benefit, in my opinion.
It's really nice when you come to, like, when you get to pull the network guys into that conversation and say, hey, I want to make this change, and they start thinking about all the implications, and you're like, yes, this is how I want to do that, to accept the fact that you have these implications of, how we're enabling port channel on these couple of links and how we want to do that. And I already want you to shut down this. And you've come to them with that that ready already, and they go, "Oh, you've already thought about all the stuff I'm concerned about. Sweet, we're on the same page.
Well,
let's make this happen."
Be honest.
Kind
The
of
first thing
greases
they
everything.
say is no. Now, what do you need? Right? Is that right? Did you
that
learn that in
happens
your
a
training?
lot of times. Yeah, all the time.
One of the things that a traditional systems admin, I would say, would brush up against that is a networking topic, though, is a V standard, vSwitch standard,
Mm-hmm.
or a VDS distributed switch, and that is becoming more and more, a topic of conversation at this point, right?
Yeah. So, like, I have to think. Obviously, I don't write VMware code, but I have to think that functionally and fundamentally, the difference between a vSwitch and a DV switch isn't that much. Kind of like when you take a look at SD-WAN, it's a bunch of VPN tunnels with some orchestration and management stuff on top of it. So at its base, I don't really see that a vSwitch is much different than a DV switch, except that we only allow some functions to happen on a DV switch, and we only allow some functions to happen on a vSwitch.
It seems like it's more of a management paradigm.
And then you get a way better management UI, because you get to configure that port group for your VMs once, and then it's consistent across all of your ESX hosts.
So here's a funny little in-the-weeds question. Do you support things like base services such as vMotion and, most importantly, storage, I would say, and even management? Do you support setting those up? And this is assuming ample physical backing ports.
Mm-hmm.
Do you support setting those up on a standard switch and then letting your more ethereal stuff like VM port groups live on a DV switch?
No, not necessarily. I would rather push out a vSwitch, DV switch for pretty much everything. There are things like when I set up port groups on a DV switch, I set up ephemeral port groups. You could argue that there's only a certain number of places you need to do that, but it's often way easier to just configure an ephemeral port group and deal with any downsides that may have.
Okay, assuage my concerns here.
Mm-hmm.
I have a vCenter, so obviously vCenter is much more involved. In a standard vSphere environment and with a standard vSwitch, the vCenter can go away.
Mm-hmm.
My VMs will reboot. HA will happen.
Mm-hmm.
Networking is not a problem because that is solely restricted or controlled by the host itself. So the vCenter can go out to lunch, and I don't care. It's not going to stop anything from happening. It's not going to stop any disaster from rebooting hosts and things like that. The DV switch now is a little tighter integrated with the vCenter server.
Yes.
What is my increase of danger if I move to a DV switch?
For everything, that's why I would lean on using ephemeral port groups, because getting into why you configure, or the settings you configure on a port group, the ephemeral port group removes the need for the host to talk to vCenter to have a quote port allocated to that system.
Okay.
So that's what you were referring to, right? That's what would happen is I lose my host. My host crashes. It's running vCenter. And so I need to go manually pick it off the data store, re-register it, and plug it in and turn it back on. But now vCenter's down, so I can't register the port the vCenter needs to plug into to bring it back up to register the port, right? So it's that chicken and the egg thing. Yeah. So if you make them all ephemeral, then they just plug in and work. Right?
And why wouldn't you make them all ephemeral?
I have no idea. I think the couple of times I've looked at it, it's like there's a 0.5% of performance difference or something, or there's this little slice of overhead that you have when you do ephemeral port groups versus not. Basically, it's not enough for me to worry about.
Does that stop us from leveraging ephemeral port groups if we want to put layer something like NSX in, which does require DV switch?
You think it does, but it doesn't. NSX doesn't anymore. So right, V's going away.
I'm living in the V world.
Yeah, you are. And that's actually a very good highlight of the difference between the two of them. NSX-V actually leveraged communicating with vCenter and doing all of the config for the switching through vCenter using a DV switch. So, of course,
it needed a DV switch at that point.
So it needs a DV switch. It has to be there. It has to use that. NSX-T, because we can install on ESX hosts, because we can install on all of the other flavors of hypervisor, The only thing it does is it takes that same kind of concept as I've got a common management plane, but all of the management functionality happens through the NSX managers. So
It's
bypasses.
speaking directly to the ESXi
Mhm.
host at that point. I mean, it's
Mhm.
probably informing. Is it informing vCenter what it's doing, but it doesn't require it to talk directly to the networking stack on the hosts.
Yeah, like you get the context of I have another port group that exists now once you build it in vCenter, but all of the management, all of the operations stuff happens straight on the DV switch. So what ends up happening is you end up deploying a bunch of management agents to all of your hypervisors.
You saying or vSwitch? You said DV switch.
I meant DV switch. I think I don't remember. Oh god,
Well, hang
that was
on.
so
You
long
said,
ago.
let me make sure. You're saying NSXT, as in
Mhm.
Thomas, no longer requires a DV switch on the hosts.
Correct.
Okay, good. Making
Correct.
sure that.
Right.
Sure
So
that's-
it deploys its management package. It deploys the VIBs to the ESX host through vCenter, and then builds your virtual switching, your network distributed virtual switch is what they're calling it through NSXT. That distributed virtual switch gets its own management address associated with it, applied to it.
I see.
It kind of operates totally independently of the hypervisor as its own little switching software service, VIB, whatever you want to call it. Communicate.
So going forward, do you see DV switch still being one of these things that not everybody uses, depending on their requirements, depending on the size of their environment, or do you see DV switch replacing the vStandard switch de facto, even if vStandard might never go away or not in the foreseeable future? Or do you see a status quo kind of maintained here?
I think, it depends on what you need, right? So one of the great things about the technology we work in is give me a problem and ask 4 different people and you'll get 4 different answers on how to solve that problem, right?
Even internal to vSphere, that's
Oh yeah, totally. So I think the vSwitch will have to be there anyway all the time because I do need some sort of facility to build networking and provide port groups to hosts in the absence of a management device. I need to be able to do something like that, even if it's for day one initial build provisioning, right? I think the DV switch.
What I like to do is I like to get your predictions. So down the road, when it finally is proven right or wrong, mostly, if it's wrong, I'm not going to go back and find the right stuff and then just say, hey, what about this?
What about this?
Yeah,
and then I think the DV switch will hang around.
So other things, other
Mhm.
topics that we kind of have. When I say we, again, systems guys bump up against. Let me throw one at you here. Your VLAN tagging approach, when you and that kind of how it ties in with physical ESXi connectivity. What is the network from kind of layer 1 to layer 2? What does that look like up to the ESXi host? Okay, I got these 2 10 gig ports. Wonderful. What does that look like?
So Cozzolino's VMware Networking Class 101, right?
Here we go.
First off, don't ever buy a 10 gig base T switch or network adapter because just don't.
No, wait.
What?
That was snuck in there.
Yeah, I
Why?
know. We didn't even write that down.
I'm not saying I disagree with you,
Yeah.
but I've also had, I don't know. I'm seeing it pop up more as
The
just
NSX
like an option.
and the 10 gig base T.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because they're cheap.
Well, I would say it's not that they're cheap. Yes, they're cheap, but I think it's in the case of, hey, I've already got this Cat 6 plant, and there are no super long runs, and can't I just leverage this? I think it's got to be an answer to that question. It has to be.
Sure. It does. The issue is 10 gig base T takes way more power than SFP plus, right? So that's a thing, and then you're stuck with 10 gig base T.
Right, you're not there's nothing you can plug in there, and it's,
right.
There's no 25
I can't swap out
gig.
an optic. I can't change anything. I can't. I challenge you to find an actual firewall with 10 gig ports that has 10 gig base T ports on it.
Sure.
I don't think you're gonna find that.
And for the record, I do agree with you, and especially when you're talking about the data center, you're not looking to re-leverage a Cat 6 plant in the data center for your connectivity. That's if you're going to the desktop.
Right.
But from a
And so that crosses that. Are we building compute? Are we building network for campus? Or are we building network for data center? Right. That's two different things.
So I'll agree with you as a rule of thumb. As with all things, there are exceptions, but overall, I would agree. 10G base T, leave it out.
Get it out of there. Other other ones, real quick. I'd say up to less than 5 meters for DAC cables, so twin X. And then if you're going cross vendors, so Cisco to HP, HP to Aruba, whatever, use fiber, use optics, because you'll save all of the headaches you'd ever have.
Again, a good rule of thumb,
Mhm.
and that is typically for when you say cross vendor, it is network device to network device that's of most concern. Is that
Yeah.
right? I mean, when you're
Yeah,
talking
usually your
network
Intel
device,
or Broadcom network adapter isn't going to have an issue with that.
exactly, to your host, and a host meaning ESXi, meaning storage, meaning end user device. Typically, it's less picky from that standpoint, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So that's my 10 gig. So that's my layer 1 options for you. Personally, so after the ESX, all of the VMware environments I've built, I've come to the conclusion that my preference is to do 802.1q tagging on all of my ports to ESX, and my untagged port, or my untagged VLAN across those links, is my ESX management.
Now, that might run counter to some of your colleagues' recommendations.
Absolutely.
Because I've kind of lived in and what is, I would argue, to be one of our networking pillars is VLAN native 999, or AKA something you're not using, a go nowhere network. So what's up with, is it just ease of initial configuration?
So that's what it is. That's exactly why, and that kind of bolts on to: am I doing port channeling, ether channel link bundling, whatever you want to call it, LACP? If you're going to do that as well, it kind of rolls into that. The preference there. So the problem that I solve with saying use your management port, use your management VLAN as your native VLAN on these links, and don't use LACP, don't use link taming, is that if you have to rebuild an ESX host, when you have to rebuild an ESX host, I can't just bring a link up on one side of that ether channel and have it work and pass traffic. I have to physically shut down a port. I can't just boot ESX off of the network, or boot this physical box off of the network and have it come up and get a DHCP address and then register somewhere. I have to go in and log into this host and set my management VLAN on it. Right?
You know, it's funny because what you're talking about, that fear of just in case I need to tear it all down, I just want it to work and be able to get access to it if all else fails, is exactly why I like standard vSwitches for the management stuff on an ESXi host versus DV switch, which you fall on the opposite side of. So it's interesting to hear you contradict yourself live and recorded.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
You know, I hear you though. It's kind of a question of where you have to go. I think one of the things I'm looking at is things like, if I'm rebuilding this host, I have to go get the network team to shut down half of my links, right? So that I can bring it back.
That is a good point, as in how much control do you have over the network stack? And I'm living in the world where, in my mind, I'm owning it all. So I'll go into the network or I'll go into the switch and I'll shut one of the ports off. Easy. But if you have to reach over and maybe put a ticket in or whatever and wait for that silo to get back to you, that is, you're isolating your control.
Right.
Makes a lot of sense.
Right. That's also why I'd say you can use NSX. You can use DV switches for all of that management stack, because you have to bring that host into the cluster anyway. And part of bringing it into the cluster is deploying that switching infrastructure.
Sure.
Right? So, perfect world, we boot ESX, it comes up, it gets an address, I discover it, I join it to the cluster, and then I just start provisioning everything. Here, you're a brand new host, you need the DV switch, let me push that down to you. And that blows away
and I
whatever.
guess from a security concern, right? And that's a large part of VLAN design and segmentation is a security issue, right? So what is your risk by having an active native VLAN on a 10 gig port or a physical port that a server plugs into? I guess it's a matter of, do you physically secure your data center?
Right. So that's kind of the thing, right? I'd still do that for access ports out in the building, or I'd between IDFs, or between the IDF and the MDF, right? I'd still say native VLAN unrouted somewhere.
And I think all of us would agree that physical security has to be assumed, or
Absolutely.
or your environment's compromised, no matter how complex your. I mean, if
Mhm.
you allow physical access to a device, you can assume that it will eventually become compromised. So I don't think from a network configuration standpoint you can say, oh, I go ahead, plug into that port. It's
Right.
on. You got to, because
Unless you're
I
running
can
out
go
of
ahead.
2.1x, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Right, you got that too. Good call back to the previous episode, Mr. Kaz.
If you remember.
Yes.
I had a meeting with a customer that's school district, and he made a very, very apt comment. He's like, "Yeah, I've got 7,000 penetration testers on any given day in my network," referring to all of the students, right? Because
I can't imagine.
high schoolers, man, crazy. Um,
Being a comp sci major at a small college, I mean, 3,000 undergrad students, was interesting because we had a department called ITS, and it was, I remember when I was a freshman, it was basically the turn of the Napster boom.
oh yeah,
So bandwidth was all of a sudden very important. Where before it's just all text, maybe web pages, and now Napster. Now you've got these downloads and binary downloads going on. So we had a single T1 at the school, which was plenty up until
1.5 meg, yeah.
up until that fall, right? And I remember ITS was like prioritizing traffic. They were blocking ports. They were pretty primitive, but they were blocking ports to save bandwidth. And what they realized was, I mean, they were trying to block Napster, but the big one that everybody used, which individually doesn't take up. Here's your argument for 10 gig on a hypervisor. It's not the individual data stream you're worried about. It's the aggregate.
Mm-hmm.
AOL Instant Messenger.
AIM.
So
Yep.
everybody used it. So they went and looked at the traffic and said, "Oh boy, what's this? This got a lot of traffic on here."
Mhm.
They blocked it. So
Ah.
we were communicating with friends from home, our parents, our family, and the school. I just remember, like, this is before memes were a thing, right? But memes were a thing, and they just didn't call them memes. And we were taking aim at AOL, like taking aim at ITS. There were some questionable artworks constructed. It was a thing. But yeah, that was an awful lot of fun. I don't remember how I quite got to that point, Matt, but just a little anecdote there.
Off
Oh
into
yeah,
the weeds.
as an IT, right? Okay,
Yeah.
as a computer science major in
Mhm.
college, and trying to get around that, trying to
Right.
exploit whatever we can. Yeah, I can't imagine having to run. I
Right.
mean, network security at an
7,000 people just
institutional.
sitting there trying one thing after another because they're bored in class or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So I had
Oh.
one other thing that I wanted to suggest for the data center for
Yes, please.
specific as far as server networking and sysadmin networking goes. That's the difference between a stacked switch and two independent management devices or two independent devices. So really the thing we're looking at is something like a pair of Catalyst switches in a switch stack versus like a pair of Nexus switches. Right?
Okay.
So the functionally from your sysadmin point of view, the biggest difference there is that those two Nexus switches are two management points. They're two separate management planes, right? So that means that when you do a firmware upgrade, you firmware upgrade one. It does its thing, it reboots, it shuts down, and then you can do the other one. Whereas with something like a stacked pair of Catalyst switches, you do the firmware upgrade and it deploys and it installs and then it reboots everything all at once.
Yeah, not only are you managing from one point, but the actual the traffic, the data traffic plane it's not one plane, but it's managed as one plane, right?
So right. So the management happens in a single point and it's controlled as a single device.
But we think, okay, from a server standpoint, I think of management. vCenter goes down, everything still operates.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, your management plane goes down, your switches are not operating.
Okay, right. So there is, if you follow that train of thought, there is a difference between the management, data, and control planes, right? It's more that because all of those devices are operating together, they all operate together. That's different than a failure scenario, right? Where one of my devices fails and the other one takes over. That happens in a switch stack. It's more that I install that firmware upgrade. It installs it to all of the nodes, all of the switches in that stack, and then reboots them all at once. You run into some things like non-disruptive upgrades where that doesn't happen, but as a general rule, the more things are a single management point, the more kind of potential there is for a failure domain to be bigger than you want it to be.
And is this something typically that we're going to see more in a closet than we are in a data center from a stack standpoint?
Well, like on the product line, on the Cisco product line, the Catalyst switches are the access switches, right? They are the data,
Right.
they are the campus networking. So yes, that's exactly what they're geared towards. That's exactly where they're aimed. And then Nexus is aimed at the data center, so it's highly available, super fast. Doesn't
Right, and
actually do as much.
Technologies, though, such as virtual port channel, that allow you to span connectivity across those two independent management planes, but still get the benefits of something like a stacked infrastructure.
Right, and this is how we end up with things like on a switch stack, I can just define a default gateway. On a pair of Nexus switches, I have to do HSRP. I can build a VPC, or I can build a port channel across a switch stack. I have to set up a VPC on a Nexus pair. So different ways to affect the same kind of thing, but you end up with some benefits if you do it this way, some detriments, some benefits if you do it the other way, some detriments. So it's all kind of a pick your poison type of a thing.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that probably wraps up our topical section of the podcast. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Wash your hands.
Yeah, wash your hands. Don't touch your face.
Don't touch your
face.
face.
Two of the things that I'm
hands. Cover
terrible
your
at,
cough,
by the
right?
way.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, but stay safe out there. Obviously, lots of sanitary gel and do the. If you haven't, I used to work at a hospital, so I know how to sneeze.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know how to sneeze, here you go. You basically like your what do the kids call it? Dabbing.
Dabbing. Yeah.
Where you
I think that's what it's called nowadays.
Yeah, your arm across, but you're basically sneezing into the crook of your elbow,
Sneeze
the
into
inside
your
of your
armpit, yeah.
Yeah, not your armpit. That'd be something. But basically the crook of your elbow, and you just wrap your arm around your face and sneeze away from people, and that's the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Keep all that aerolized. Oh, what's the word?
Aerosolized
spit. Yeah, basically, right? That's what you're doing. You're knocking all the.
Oh, you've seen the videos probably in school of somebody sneezing in slow motion with a really high quality camera. That's some nasty stuff.
The other fun one that we did. So I do ski patrol. I don't know if we've touched on that. The other fun one that we'll do when we do infectious disease is that we've got some. It's like talcum powder, but it's UV sensitive. So we'll have one or two people come up to the class, the front of the class at the beginning, and we'll put some of the powder on their hands, and then we go back and sit down for the rest of class. And at the end, we have everyone come up, because we've done some stuff. We have everyone come up, and we've got the black lights, and we see where all of this powder has gotten. And it's all over people's face, all over around their mouth, all over on my
simulating
hands,
air,
on your hands, because we've
whatever.
shaken hands, and we've done something, and then
Nasty.
send them off to wash their hands, and we come back and we do it again, and we look and say, hey, look, you didn't actually wash your hands. Yeah, it's eye-opening when you get to see some of that stuff.
I'm going to need a different kind of therapy than data center after this. That's for darn sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for listening to yet another episode of Data Center Therapy. If you love it, tell us. Give us a 5-star review. If you hate it, tell Mr. Cozzolino, as always. You can reach us at podcast@ivoxy.com and subscribe to us wherever fine podcasts are sold and or offered. For Mr. Cozzolino, I am Matt Yeti. Thank you for listening to Data Center Therapy. Have a good day, y'all.
Bye.